I am the sun of wisdom and the ocean of knowledge. I cheer the faint and revive the dead. I am the guiding light that illumineth the way. I am the royal falcon on the arm of the Almighty. I unfold the drooping wings of every broken bird and start it on its flight. Bahá'u'lláh. In this day, he who is the Lord, the ruler, the fashioner, and the refuge of the world hath appeared. Let every ear be eager to hearken unto that which will be revealed from the kingdom of his will. Let every eye be expectant to gaze upon that which will shine forth from the day star of knowledge and wisdom. By him who is the desire of the world. This is the day for eyes to see and for ears to hear, for hearts to perceive and for tongues to speak forth. Blessed are they that have attained thereunto. Blessed are they that have sought after and recognized it. This is the day whereon every man may accede unto everlasting honor, for whatsoever hath streamed forth from the pen of glory in regard to any soul is adorned with the ornament of immortality. Again, blessed are they that have attained thereunto. Bahá'u'lláh.
Thank you. So today our speaker is Mr. David Langness, and his topic is Who is Bahá'u'lláh and why have his teachings spread around the world? Mr. David Langness is an editor for George Ronald Publishers. Prior to that, he edited and wrote for Bahá'íTeachings.org, the world's largest Bahá'í website, which he helped nurture and build since 2012. Prior to Bahá'íTeachings.org, David's extensive 30-year career as a communications executive resulted in the creation, design, and operation of major communications campaigns, branding strategies, educational initiatives, and IPOs for large nonprofit and for-profit organizations and academic institutions. So with that, I'm happy to hand it off to Mr. Langness.
Thanks, Pemane, and thank you everybody for coming. It's great to see you all. I know some of the names I see on the screen, which is wonderful. Good to see friends again. And thanks for the music. My apologies, although my fault, but my apologies for how bad music sounds on Zoom. It never sounds good. In my community that I live in Northern California, some of you may know the musician J.B. Eckel, and J.B. lives here, and so we always do music in our community and on Zooms, and that's the constant complaint that Zoom still hasn't gotten music right. Someday maybe that'll happen. Probably listening to that music, if you haven't heard Bahá'í music before, you wondered, gosh, who sang that and where does it come from? If you go to YouTube or just about any other music platform these days and search for the word Bahá'í or the word Bahá'u'lláh, who's the founder of the Bahá'í Faith, you will find music from all over the world in hundreds of languages about the Bahá'í Faith and Bahá'u'lláh. That is quite remarkable. The Bahá'í Faith only began a little less than 2 centuries ago, and it has spread all over the planet. It has spread into every culture, every nation, all previous faiths, just about every racial group and class that you can imagine, which is completely remarkable. When you look at the history of other world faiths, you can see that it took them hundreds and hundreds of years, many centuries, to spread around the world. The Baha'i Faith now is the world's second most widespread religion after Christianity. It's amazing. Anywhere you go, you can find a Baha'i. This is a common realization for Baha'i travelers. You go to a brand new city, somewhere in a country you've never been before, whose culture you don't know, and guess what? There are Baha'is there. It's quite amazing. So I want to tell you today why the Baha'i Faith has spread so rapidly and so far in such a diverse way. It's quite a remarkable story. In fact, I think it's the most remarkable story in the world today. Baha'is don't advertise it. Baha'is don't proselytize. You've got to ask to find out. It's kind of a secret. We're sort of an unlisted religion. You know, we tend not to blast it out there, but only to tell people who are interested. And yet, the Baha'i Faith has spread all over our globe. That's due to its founder and prophet, Bahá'u'lláh. Bahá'u'lláh, by the way, is a title. It means the glory of God. Bahá'u'lláh was born in Persia in 1817. And you think about that, a little more than 200 years ago, born into a Muslim society, a very backward society. Thank you, Taimani. And in that society, he was born into a fairly well-off family. He came from a remarkable lineage. He was descended from the prophet Abraham through his wife Keturah, and from Zoroaster, the founder of the Zoroastrian faith. So his ancestry is traced back through the line of the ancient Persian kings and their pre-Muslim empire for many centuries. His father was named Mirza Hussein, Abbas Nuri Mirza Buzurg. And his wife, Khadija, gave birth to Baha'u'lláh, like I said, in 1817. He was born in Tehran, and his name, when he was born, was Mirza Hussein Ali. He was born in this room. You can see from the room itself, sorry, it's such a fuzzy picture, but you can see from the room itself that he was born into a fairly wealthy family. His father, Mirza Buzurg, was a prominent figure in the Persian government, one of the ministers to the Shah. His father was the governor of one of the provinces of Persia, well known throughout the country, and fairly well off, like I said. Next slide, please. This is a drawing, really, not a photograph, of course, of Mirza Buzurg from the province of Nur, which means light. Wazir-i-Nuri, Wazir means the head of Nur. And Mirza Hussein Ali was their third child. Next slide, please. This is the house where Baha'u'lláh was born. As you can see, it's fairly elaborate. As I said, Baha'u'lláh was born into the ruling class of Persia at the time. But he was a unique and remarkable child. Next slide. This is the same house, just from a different perspective, and there are a group of Baha'is there in the front. I don't know who they are, I wish I did. But you can see the house itself. It's now been demolished by the Iranian government. The Baha'is in Iran are still persecuted terribly. Many Baha'is lost their lives for accepting Baha'u'llah's faith. That's a terrible situation that continues to this day, but I'm not here to talk about that today. I want to talk about Baha'u'lláh himself. He was a remarkable child. He he was expected from almost infancy to do great things. Next slide, please. This, by the way, is some of his early calligraphy, his writing as a child. Baha'u'llah's calligraphy has been collected and exhibited at the British Museum, and you can see there that it transformed from these early attempts when he was small to some of the most beautiful calligraphy in the world. Quite remarkable. If you're ever in London, go see it. At the age of 7, this is just one example of how incredibly advanced Baha'u'llah's knowledge and wisdom was, even as a child. He never attended any school, but at the age of 7, he appeared before the court of the Shah to argue a legal case, a tax case, on behalf of his father, and he won. Think about that. For those of you, Payman, I am looking at you. For those of you attorneys in the group, think about defending a case in the court of the Shah, the king, when you were 7 years old. I don't know how that would be even possible, but Baha'u'llah did that. Like I said, he grew up in relative luxury. He was accustomed to the royal court because his father was one of the ministers. But his father passed away at a relatively young age in 1839, when Baha'u'llah was 22 years old. And of course, as is the custom in the East, Baha'u'llah was the one who would have, and he did, inherit his father's estate, all of his wealth. His father had indentured servants that Baha'u'llah inherited and immediately freed. But his father also had this position in the Shah's court that I mentioned. And Baha'u'llah was considered for that position. The Shah wanted him to take it even at the age of 52, even though he never attended any schools, widely known and respected throughout the country for deep wisdom and knowledge at that young age. But Baha'u'llah turned down his father's position in the court of the Shah. This was unheard of. He didn't do that. These positions were inherited, and they stayed in families for generations. When he was offered his father's previous post, he refused, and the Grand Vizier, the second in command, I guess you would call him sort of vice president of Persia at the time, said Mirza Hussein Ali was intended for a work of greater magnitude, and the arena of government was too small a field for his capacity. That is true. So what did he do? What did he pursue instead of government service? Well, he had already turned his attention to the social and spiritual problems of the region. Chiefly the poverty and privation that people suffered in Persia's capital and in the outlying regions of Persia. So when his father passed away, Baha'u'llah opened his very large estate, that house that you saw and others, to the poor and the homeless. He and his wife, Nawab, who was married at that point, soon became known throughout the country as the father of the poor and the mother of consolation. They became famed all over the Middle East at that point for devoting their lives to people's needs. They were kind, altruistic, philanthropic. They were enormously devoted to poor people. Another prominent Persian government official described Mirza Hussein Ali this way. He said, "He is one of the noble class, but above all ostentation, seldom attending state functions, extremely wealthy, but caring nothing for luxury and sumptuous fare, full of a marvelous wisdom. Yet he has never been instructed of men, even when a young boy. He is the helper of all, a refuge for those in sorrowful weariness, a comfort to all the afflicted, a strong champion of those who suffer wrong. To the shelter of his house, all who hunger or thirst are warmly welcome. His hospitality is given freely at every corner. His doors are always open to the friendless, and his heart to every tale of grief." He refused all those lucrative posts which were offered to him, including the government post that I spoke about, and said that he would not focus on any of the things of the world, but would focus instead on the souls of humanity. Then by the way, this summer village up in the mountains, a place called Yalrud, was also owned by Baha'u'llah's father, and of course later by Baha'u'lláh. A beautiful village in the mountains. Next slide. This is a village nearby where Baha'u'lláh met his wife, also known as Nawab. Next slide. Like I said, he was known as the father of the poor, and Nawab was known as the mother of consolation. This is a picture of Tehran from 1920s or so you can get an idea of what the city looked like. Today it's a modern metropolis with high rises and a couple million people. Then it was, as you can see here, spread out wide against the mountains of northern Iran and filled with a great deal of poverty. Many, many people were destined to move to the city because their farms failed. Those were the people primarily who Baha'u'lláh offered their care and housing and food. A lot of folks who knew Baha'u'lláh and his wife were worried that they would spend themselves into poverty by taking care of the poor. That was a true concern for the extended family and for friends, etc. Ultimately, that did happen, and it happened very suddenly, and I'll tell you why. In 1844, when Baha'u'lláh was 27, everything began to change. A revolutionary, charismatic new religion rose up in Persia in the midst of a very traditional and hidebound Muslim culture, and it was led by a man named the Bab, which means the gate. Bab was a young man, 25 at the time, who claimed to be the herald and the forerunner of a new prophet of God, a new messenger from the Creator. The Bab also claimed that this new messenger would fulfill the prophecies of all the religions of the past and represent the return of all those previous prophets the return spoken of in all the holy books of Krishna, of Abraham, of Moses, the Buddha, Christ, Muhammad, etc. So Mirza Hussein Ali, Baha'u'lláh, recognized the Bab's claims immediately without ever meeting him. He just read a letter, a tablet that the Bab had written and immediately knew that it was true. And so accepted the Bab and became a Babi. This was catastrophic for those who did so, at least physically. Why? Because the Babis were being severely persecuted, great violence and prejudice. Probably during the reign of the Bab, which lasted 6 years until his execution in 1850, more than 20,000 Babis were imprisoned, tortured, and executed. Some of them in horrible ways that I won't even recount. They're terrible to hear. Baha'u'lláh was one of those Babis. He was also imprisoned and tortured. After the execution of the Bab by the government of Persia in 1850, he was killed by a firing squad. Baha'u'lláh, too, was jailed in the Black Pit of Tehran in 1852. There, as soon as the people of Persia realized that Baha'u'lláh, this nobleman, this wealthy individual, this altruistic, dedicated servant of the poor, as soon as they realized he had been imprisoned in the Black Pit, which was Persia's worst prison, they looted everything he owned, took the homes, the possessions, the money, everything that Baha'u'lláh and his wife owned. So they went from being well off to completely destitute in one day. You can imagine that, what that was like. His properties were pillaged. The villages that he owned in the outlying parts of Persia were taken, often by government functionaries who had wanted them for a long time. And yet, Baha'u'lláh persisted. He could have at any time said, oh, I no longer believe in the Bab or in this new faith, but instead he suffered the persecution that was meted out to him gladly and with great sacrifice. This is the room, by the way, in Shiraz, Persia, where the Bab declared his mission in 1844. That house has also been destroyed by the Persian government, but will be rebuilt one day. The Bab counseled people, excuse me, the Bab counseled people to follow his successor. He prophesied that there would be a successor before he was executed. He said he had only come to announce the tidings of him whom God shall make manifest. I'll tell you this story about Baha'u'lláh and the dervish in a minute. But first I want to tell you that the Bab said, whenever ye learn that a new cause hath appeared, ye must seek the presence of its author and must delve into his writing, that haply ye may not be debarred from attaining unto him whom God shall make manifest at the hour of his manifestation. And this claim is a huge one. It is a claim that all humanity ultimately must deal with. Why? Because Baha'u'lláh is claiming to be the return, the promised return of all ages, of all of these previous prophets. Baha'is believe that God has given humanity a succession of messengers, prophets, manifestations, who have brought spiritual teachings to mankind. And that means for all people that these claims must be investigated. We have a duty to check them out. We don't have to believe those claims. It's up to us, the Baha'i teachings say, to independently investigate the truth and to find it, to determine for ourselves whether these claims are true or not. If they're true, well, it reminds me of the inscription over the Delphic oracle in Greece. There's a famous inscription that one philosopher said should be inscribed over the doors of every house of worship all over the world. And that inscription says, important if true. Just those three words I love, important if true. Yes, these teachings are incredibly important. If you determine that they're true, they will change your life, I guarantee it. Determining that truth is up to you. That's why the Baha'i Faith has no clergy. That's why the Baha'i Faith has no ritual or rites. It is completely up to you to look at it and to determine for yourself whether you think it's true or not. If you do think it's true, you're a Baha'i, and you would join the global Baha'i community, which is wonderful, and become an advocate of Baha'u'llah's teaching, the oneness of humanity, the oneness of all faith, and the oneness of God. Okay, so the Bab was executed, Baha'u'llah was imprisoned, and in that prison, that deep dungeon, incredibly dark, underground, he had a mystical vision. That mystical vision told him that he was going to be assigned by the Creator, be a new prophet, to start a new faith, and to suffer as a result, just as all prophets suffer. So, in the same way that Christ initially became a follower of his predecessor, John the Baptist, before declaring his own mission, Baha'u'llah first became a follower of the Bab and then declared his mission in 1863. He said to the world that he had appeared to bring the teachings of the Creator to humanity. These new teachings, he said, were befitting for the modern world. And those teachings are simply magnificent. The equality of men and women, the bringing about of world peace, the agreement of science and religion, the enormous and powerful teaching that Baha'u'llah gave that the entire world should adopt a single universal language and a single universal currency. All of these things Baha'u'llah prophesied would eventually come to pass. Trying to be careful not to go on too long here. I want to leave some time for questions, so I'll wrap this up in 5 minutes or so, and there'll be plenty of time if we want to consult and discuss. Typically, when Baha'u'llah was imprisoned with many other Babis, they attempted to endure their imprisonment with great spiritual joy. I know that sounds like a contradiction, but it's true. Baha'u'lláh would lead the prisoners in song from that prison, and it was close enough to the palace that the Shah could hear them singing. And he couldn't figure it out. He said, no prisoners have ever done this before. And he sent his emissaries to find out why they were doing it, even though each day the guards would call one of the prisoners up out of that dungeon and execute one of those prisoners. Despite all that pain, the deprivation, and the suffering that Baha'u'lláh went through, he saw that vision in the Black Pit. And he described it this way. I'll read 2 paragraphs to you from this beautiful description of how that mystic vision occurred. While engulfed in tribulation, I heard a most wondrous, a most sweet voice calling above my head. Turning my face, I beheld a maiden, the embodiment of the remembrance of the name of my Lord, suspended in the air before me. So rejoiced was she in her very soul that her countenance shone with the ornament of the good pleasure of God, and her cheeks glowed with the brightness of the All-Merciful. Betwixt earth and heaven, he was raising a call which captivated the hearts and minds of men. He was imparting to both my inward and outer being tidings which rejoiced my soul, and the souls of God's honored servants. And she pointed out to Baha'u'lláh that he was the best beloved of all the world, the newest manifestation of God. But to bring about revelation of a new faith. There's an artist's rendition, by the way, of the Black Pit where it was. You can see sort of there, 2 layers above it. Below was the dark dungeon, which used to be a water catchment area, transformed into a prison 3 stories below the earth. You can imagine how foul it was. No sanitary facilities, no running water, no nothing. It's a deep underground pit. And the tidings that Baha'u'lláh received there, that I just read to you, really incredible that this vision came to him there. Baha'u'lláh kept that to himself for the next 11 years. I suspect, I don't know this for sure, I'm guessing, but I suspect that this was a very huge burden to bear on anyone. Certainly Moses, Muhammad, Christ, all when they received that same revelation, that same burden, they all went to the wilderness to contemplate it. Out to the desert, usually. This is the last slide, I think. There. They went to the desert to meditate and consider what this enormous responsibility meant. This powerful message from the Creator that you have become the new prophet, destined to bring the spiritual teachings of the Supreme Being to you. All right. At this point, I can tell you a couple of. Bahá'u'lláh went on after he was released from that prison 4 months later to live in poverty and destitution the rest of his life, to live in great danger, always in danger of execution, to be tortured and imprisoned over and over again. He was exiled 4 times, first from Tehran to Baghdad in 1863, then from Baghdad to several other places before he was finally exiled to the worst prison in the Ottoman Empire, which was in Akka, Palestine, at the farthest reaches of the East at the time on the Mediterranean, in a walled prison city known as Acre or Akka, in which many Christians were imprisoned during the 1st century after Christ. This is where the Ottoman Empire and the Persian government sent their worst criminals, the ones that they wanted to remove entirely from their society. Bahá'u'lláh wound up in 1868 in the prison city of Akka, along with his retinue, his family, and several of the believers who would not leave him. And there he finished the proclamation of the Baha'i Faith. He addressed the kings and rulers of the world. Baha'is began to visit him from all over. Many people walking 1,000 miles to see him in that prison. Ultimately, Abdul-Baha, his son and his successor, after Baha'u'llah's passing in 1892, became the one who managed all of that and was able to get Baha'u'lláh released from the prison and into house arrest under the Ottoman Empire, so he could live in the countryside in a home that Abdul-Baha arranged. By this time, people from all over the Middle East were coming to Baha'u'lláh, learning of his revelation and becoming Baha'is. After Baha'u'llah's passing in 1892, Abdul-Baha, his son, was finally freed from prison by the Young Turk Rebellion in 1908. That means both Baha'u'lláh and Abdul-Baha spent more than 40 years in prison, most of their lives. When Abdul-Baha was freed, he began to travel. He traveled all over Europe and to the United States and Canada. In 1912, he was in Europe in 1911, 1913. He spoke to audiences of thousands of people and proclaimed his father's faith to dignitaries, heads of state, etc. In fact, during that period, right after Abdul-Baha's passing in 1921, heads of state themselves began becoming Baha'is. Queen Marie of Romania, King Malietoa from the Pacific. Others have decided that Baha'u'llah's faith, that the claims he made were true and have become Baha'is. And that's really my challenge to you today. That this prisoner, this incredible prophet of God, has made claims to bring a new faith to the world. Ask yourself, if you were alive during the time of Christ, would you have recognized him? If you were alive during, let's say, a couple hundred years after Christ's passing, when Christianity was still being persecuted, do you remember those lions in the Colosseum? I read in National Geographic yesterday that they found bones buried near the Colosseum with the tooth marks of lions in them. So that wasn't just a story. That was the truth. Those followers were persecuted terribly. just as the followers of Bahá'u'lláh were persecuted and still are in some places. So you have to ask yourself, if this is true, if the claims of Bahá'u'lláh are true, then they're incredibly important. I'll leave it there. It's 9:45, and I hope that we'll talk and have questions. Thank you for listening. I appreciate you all coming very much.
Thank you so much for sharing that great overview of Baha'u'lláh and his life and impact. We really appreciate it. Now, if people have questions, they can put their questions in the chat. We have one question. What distinguishes Baha'u'lláh from other religious figures in history?
Oh. How long do you have? You know, I suspect this question may have come from my friend Chris Buck, who has asked this question himself and answered it beautifully in many essays that he wrote for BahaiTeachings.org, also in several of his books. You know, Baha'u'lláh himself claimed communion and equality with all of the previous prophets. He said that no prophet should be raised above another, that they all had the exact same remit from the Creator. And that's really a powerful statement, if you think about it. That means that even the prophets that we sort of think of as minor prophets, perhaps the ones who appeared to the indigenous tribal peoples of the Western Hemisphere, for example, or the minor prophets that are mentioned in the Old Testament, all of those prophets, Baha'u'lláh said, give the same light. However, Abdu'l-Baha, in several different talks and tablets, called out the Baha'i teachings as very different and very new, very different from other previous faiths. Why? Because the capacity of humanity has increased, not the capacity of the prophets themselves. They are all knowing and understanding. But our capacity as human beings, we grow and mature just as every growing thing does. Just as an individual human being goes from elementary school to graduate school, eventually, humanity itself grows in its capacity to understand. We know much more now than we ever have in the past. So those prophets are able to give us much more knowledge, much more insight, much more spiritual penetration, and we are able to receive it. I would commend to you Chris Buck's series on Abdu'l-Baha's talks about why the Baha'i faith is different on BahaiTeachings.org. You can find them all there. There are many other considerations that I could go into, but time is short.
Thank you. Why do you think the social teachings have been more accepted by Western society, while at the same time belief in God seems to have declined?
No, I'll tell you a personal story. My own belief in God declined when I was 11 years old. I was raised as a Lutheran in a very hellfire and brimstone Lutheran church in rural Washington state. And at 11, I was sent by my parents and grandparents to confirmation classes. Those of you who come from a Protestant background know what I'm talking about. In confirmation, they began to teach me the fundamentals of Lutheranism. And all of those fundamentals seemed irrational to me at 11 years old. You know, I began to think of them as, these don't make any sense. And so I began asking questions. And my questions got me kicked out. The youth pastor at the Lutheran church called my mother after about 3 sessions in the confirmation classes and said, David can't come back anymore. Please keep him home on Sundays. I was very happy with that outcome, but others were not, especially my grandparents, who were very stolid Norwegian Lutherans and who wanted me to be raised in a faith. At that point, I began to disbelieve in God. I thought, I just don't accept this God, the old guy with the white beard sitting up on the clouds. The God that was presented to me seemed unbelievable to me. He also seemed cruel and kind of not a very nice creator. Why? Because I was told that he consigned people to hell if they didn't know about him. This seemed to me a terrible outcome when I was 11 and 12 years old. And so I rejected God. I became what I thought of at the time as an agnostic and maintained that belief until later in my adolescence, I encountered the Baha'i Faith. And I encountered it, interestingly enough, not through people like me, but instead through 3 wonderful indigenous people. One was a Navajo, one was an Inuit, and one was a Hopi. And they were all Baha'i. And I met them in the course of my work in the civil rights movement. As a young teenager, I really got imbued with a sense of injustice, that people were being treated unjustly. And so I joined CORE and NAACP and began to work for civil rights. And in the course of that work, I met these 3 wonderful Indian Baha'is who taught me the faith, not through their words, but through their deeds. It was the way they acted toward others. It was the love they had for humanity itself. It was the great dedication to service that I saw in them. My friend Art Jess drove his pickup truck once a month, 500 miles each way from southern Arizona to the Navajo reservation to deliver food, clothing, medicine. And he asked me to come with him. And Art was a man of few words. we would drive 500 miles and he would say maybe 10 words. But I listened so carefully to those words because he never said anything that wasn't enormously important. I'm not really answering your question. I'll try to do that. I think in the West, and this is a much longer and bigger discussion, so I'm sorry I'm not doing it justice. But I think in the West that we have all fallen victim to this presentation of the Creator and the Creator's prophets that we've received from our prevailing culture. We tend to think of God in the wrong way. Instead, the Baha'i teachings tell us God is an unknowable essence, a huge and completely imperceptible force in our unbounded universe. If there are any physicists in our fireside today, any cosmologists, you know what I'm talking about. This universe has no limits. We can't see far enough to find its edges because there are no edges. It is infinite. In the same way, its creator is even more infinite. We've been kind of bamboozled to think that the creator is someone or something that we can perceive and therefore reject. Instead, the creator is something we cannot perceive the Baha'i teachings tell us, and can only understand through the messages of the Prophet.
Thank you. What does Baha'u'lláh say about the conditions of the world today?
Well, Bahá'u'lláh was not very sanguine about those conditions. He said that great injustice permeates the world today, and that it is our duty, our meaning humanity, meaning all of us, to remediate those injustices. He asked us to find a way to, for instance, remove the great disparity between the rich and the poor. Baha'u'llah's teachings ask us to bring women to the forefront of human culture. They ask us to focus our own inner lives on the numinous, on the mystical, on those things that really move us within. I wish my friend Todd Lawson could give a talk about that right now, because he's brilliant on those subjects, much more than I am. I think that the answer to the question really is found in Baha'u'llah's writing. And that's how I'll end this presentation. Coming right up to the hour. These claims that Baha'u'llah made, be the newest manifestation of God, are serious and important claims. They challenge every one of us to either accept or reject them. And in order to do that, I would commend to you the reading of the Baha'i writings. They are voluminous. It's quite remarkable. Baha'u'llah wrote more than 100 volumes. There are many books that you can read his writings in. You can find them free online. They're available to you. The language is elevated and sometimes difficult, but if you persist, you will find in them enormous spiritual sustenance, wisdom, and guidance. And that, for me, is the real crux of all that I've been trying to tell you today. Baha'u'llah came to leave us with that guidance in his writing. Those writings have not been modified as they were in previous revelations by oral histories, etc. The Baha'is have the original writing. And so please take a look at what Baha'u'llah wrote and see if it resonates in your soul like it does in mine.
Thank you. I believe that's all the questions we have. So thank you.
Perfect. Good timing.
Yeah, thank you so much for that talk. And like I said, this talk will be posted on our YouTube channel if you'd like to share it with any friends that were not here today. So yeah, thank you so much. And our next week, our speaker will be Mr. Jason Heiner, and he'll be talking about Christians' top 5 questions about the Baha'i Faith. So again, these talks are every Saturday at noon Eastern time. I've put the link to our mailing list and our YouTube channel in the chat. Thank you, everyone. Hope you have a nice week, and we'll see you next week. Bye.